Hello, my name is Danielle Simpson. I'm representing California State University Stanislaus, and my research examines the relationship between physical activity and cognitive function in older adults. When I talk about cognitive function, I'm really talking about a variety of different mental components, such as learning, memory, perception, reasoning, language. And when I talk about cognitive decline is often associated with cognitive-related diseases, such as Alzheimer's or dementia. But cognitive decline is a natural part of the aging process. So my research looked at physical activity as a preventative measure for cognitive decline in older adults. I have some statistics here from the Global Burden of Disease and Dementia Collaborators. As we can see, in 1990, the prevalence of cognitive decline was 20.2 million people. In 2016, it more than doubled to 43.8 million people with cognitive decline. And in 2030, it's projected in the next 10 years to rise to 74.7 million people with cognitive decline. So what can be done preventatively? Previous research shows that physical activity is associated with higher cognitive functioning. Wang and colleagues did a study in China looking at an older adult population and their levels of physical activity in association to how they performed on a dementia screening tool. And the results of that study showed that those who engage in more physical activity had higher cognitive abilities on the dementia screening tool. In addition, Guri and colleagues they conducted a meta-analysis looking at different studies, and their results showed that physical activity was a preventative measure for dementia and cognitive decline. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in the brain when we engage in physical activity. I have here some brain cells. This is our neurons. This is the presynaptic neuron, and this is the postsynaptic neuron. And so they're trying to make a connection with each other. The presynaptic neuron is going to send neurotransmitters right here to the postsynaptic neuron. And in return, the postsynaptic neuron is going to send neurotrophin to the presynaptic neuron. And neurotrophin acts like Miracle-Gro for the brain cells, and it helps to keep them alive. So previous research shows, done by Slayman and colleagues, that this brain-derived neurotrophic factor increases our cognitive abilities because it helps to keep the brain cells alive. In addition, this neurotrophic factor increases when we engage in physical activity. So as we can see, there's an association between physical activity, neurotrophic factor, and then cognitive capabilities. So the purpose of my research was to examine the relationship between physical activity and exercise. So when I talk about physical activity, I'm talking about subjective self-reports of physical activity, which could be anything that expends energy, such as gardening or walking. The objective exercise is more concrete, and exercise tends to be done for a purpose, whether it be to improve our overall health or to lose weight. So that was collected on participants' key cards. My hypothesis here was that there would be a positive correlation between subjective physical activity of what people they were reporting they were active and objective reports of exercise. In addition, I looked at the overall physical activity and how that correlated to cognitive function as measured by the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale 4th edition, which is kind of like the gold standard assessment, cognitive assessment, also known as the WAIS-4. And my hypothesis there was that there would be positive correlation between physical activity and cognitive function. So the methods. My colleagues and I went into a local retirement community and recruited 49 participants. 16 of them were male and 33 were female. The mean age was 79.66 years old with a standard deviation of 6.3. 67% of them were female, ranging from the ages of 67 to 89. It's important to note that anybody over the age of 90 was not included because of the standards for the WAIS-4. The cutoff age is 90. And we can see here that they were a fairly well-educated group of people. The 32.7% of them earned a master's degree or higher, 30.6% earned a bachelor's degree, 4.1% earned an associate's degree, and 8.2% earned a high school education. The measures I looked at physical activity as the predictor variable. So I had subjective reports of physical activity that were collected on a demographics questionnaire where participants reported the type of physical activity they engaged in, the intensity, and the frequency per week. This was then converted to a scale for metabolic equivalence based on intensity and frequency. Objective data was collected from their key cards. They all have access to the same gym facility where they can take classes or lift weights, engage in cardiovascular activity. And so that's all recorded on these key cards. That data was then converted to a scale of metabolic equivalence based on the total amount of engagement in exercise per week. The outcome variable was cognitive function as measured by the WAIS-4 full-scale IQ score. So the WAIS-4 is comprised of 10 different subtests. We have block design, similarities, digit span, vocabulary, matrix reasoning, arithmetic, symbol search, visual puzzles, information, and coding. And these subtests make up larger composite scores, whether it be perceptual reasoning, it could be language, working memory, visuospatial skills. And so the outcome variable was the composite scores of the WAIS-4. The session, I broke it up into two different sessions. So during the first session, the participants were given an informed consent, followed by a demographics questionnaire, which asked them about their health history, their age, any pre-existing conditions. They were also asked about their physical activity in the demographics questionnaire. During the second session, my colleagues and I administered the WAIS-4. The WAIS-4 is a very interactive assessment. It's almost like an interview where we would give the participants tools or maybe ask them to draw a picture or answer questions and record their responses, all while being timed. They were then given a debriefing form. So the results. I ran a Pearson's correlation to look at objective exercise and subjective self-reports of physical activity. And we can see here that I achieved a strong, positive, significant correlation between the two of 0.96 with a p-value of 0.001. So this supported my hypothesis that objective exercise would be related to subjective self-reports of physical activity. I ran another Pearson's correlation with physical activity and the composite scores of the WAIS-4, and I achieved positive significant results in two of the composite scores. So I have working memory and visuospatial skills. We can think of working memory as the ability to perform a task effectively, and visuospatial skills could be how we use our surroundings. This was tested through like block design, things like that, our ability to park a car. And so I have the correlation for working memory was a 0.35. You can see that in this red line here, and with a p-value of 0.015. And for visuospatial skills, this blue line here, the correlation was a 0.32 with a p-value of 0.027. So my hypothesis here was also supported that physical activity would be associated with higher cognitive function. The bigger picture, what does this all mean? So implications of this research show that physical activity could be a preventative measure for cognitive decline, especially as we age. Limitations of this research were a fairly small homogeneous sample of participants. They all resided in the same community and had access to the same facilities. They were all well educated. And so further research should look at different populations. How does this apply to the world as a whole, across ages or different types of physical activity and how that correlates to cognitive function, and specific types of cognitive function that are associated with physical activity. I wanted to give a special thanks to my mentor, Dr. Kelly Cotter, and the McNair program for funding this research, as well as the members of the Healthy Aging Lab. And thank you to you for listening to my presentation. I look forward to answering your questions soon.